Welcome to the Religiously Offensive Podcast.
We'll delve deeper. Okay.
I digress.
Here's a question.
Bring it.
I feel like there's two people in the world.
There's actually like
There's a lot.
7
There's a lot
billion
more
In
or
this
something like that.
respect. In this respect.
All right.
Are you capable of sleeping in until noon if you have nothing to do?
Not anymore.
Are we talking about?
Could you?
I would have to force myself to I'd be like, go back to sleep.
Because
I'd wake up 30 times, but I could stay in bed till
Yeah,
noon.
yeah.
I can't sleep though for that
But
long.
like there's people like
yeah.
so I think about growing up sleepovers and I'm the kid. I'm just the early riser. My parents
Yeah,
are the
I know.
same way.
Always
All of
happened?
my family's the same way.
Always happened to me too.
Didn't matter. Like I'm up nowadays. Like I don't even like I have a 5 o'clock alarm every morning just kind of for fun.
I need that.
But usually
Doesn't sound fun.
I'll tell Alexa to shut up, and then I usually kind of doze for a few more. But I'm usually right around 6. If I don't set alarms, 6 to 7 a.m. is when I
Tell you
just
what,
wake up.
I'm the guy that sets 20 alarms. I have a script, like one of those shortcuts on my phone. I hit the button, it automatically just sets 20 alarms, like
I would
every 5
hate
minutes
you.
from like 4:45 till 7. It sets them all.
I feel so
I just
bad for
feel like
Christina. Is she already awake?
I feel like you're
5
just
to 7.
destroying your last 2 hours of sleep there. I mean, you could just sleep in peace and just
I don't set an alarm.
you know,
wow.
Well,
we've got a lot
we're
of different
human and we
approaches
have
here.
some weird things about us, right?
yeah. Well, I
I
just
kind of like
remember.
hear Rachel leave, and I'm like, it's time to get up.
Well,
It's like I'm starting to feel like a lazy piece of crap right now.
Yeah.
I need
Yeah.
to get out of bed.
All of a sudden, this bed is the most comfortable it's been this entire night.
Yeah.
But you know what's funny though? It's just
We'll
like
start out.
like my wife does not have that sense. Because I leave like every day. I mean, sometime between 5 and 6:30, and she'll still
Just
sleep.
sleep through it.
She'll love it. Yeah. In
heavy
fact,
sleeper.
In fact, she adjusts like her positioning to
you
take
got-
advantage of more of the bed.
She's
Yeah.
like,
So unpopular
Absolutely.
opinion.
Finally, he's gone.
I think it's very like I don't like sharing beds for the sake of my own sleep.
Sure.
And I've seen studies
You have a king.
that talk about Dave Asbury. No, well that's true. That's
If you have
true.
a king,
You basically do
you
have
you
your
have
own
the
bed.
choice of whether you want to touch or not touch.
That's fair.
They're
But something I swear to God, it's something psychological.
I need a king.
Like
I need a queen.
Because I know a couple guys that are big into biohacking, and they religiously have their own bed. They're like happily married, but their sleep is they take it seriously.
I've seen that. Yeah,
I
I
sleep
mean,
fine. Maybe Rachel does.
Did you know
but
you
I
can
do.
buy mats that emulate the electromagnetic type of
Oh, here we go.
whatever of the earth? Like you know how some people do grounding or earthing, or it's just like
you're
you know,
always the one to bring this stuff up.
dude. I'm just saying.
You know,
I think this
magnetically-
stuff's
What is your Google search
fascinating.
history?
It's that Huberman lab.
All you just need to
Huberman,
watch
yeah.
one person that knows what they're talking about explain like quantum physics and how the nature of the universe is like not what we think it is. And then you're just like
there are
Albert Einstein goes back to Albert Einstein.
Don't get Justin
I get my
into
quantum physics info from the Avengers.
okay. You guys are all crazy.
Yeah, I mean,
There are quantum physicists that will tell you they don't understand everything.
well, right.
Like, so then you have this like
got
schmo on a
string theory.
podcast.
Yeah, you've
that's
got
just
all
like,
kinds.
Oh, I fully understand quantum.
Well, but that's the beauty of it. It's just like we live in this world and we try to act like we know what's going on. It's like we have no idea. Like the particle experiment.
a lot of times people just like use like quantum theory, quantum physics as this bucket or catch-all of everything that we don't understand just falls into like quantum mechanics.
Well, the basic approach is like when you think about like Newtonian physics versus quantum physics, where Newtonian is like like Isaac Newton sat under the tree, apple falls. He's like, oh, like cause and effect. There's gravity type of Newtonian physics. We're just experiencing this thing. Quantum physics essentially says I can cause the effect. And we're less matter, we're more energy. That's like the whole, you get into the manifesting and all kinds of stuff like that. So, yeah, slightly religiously offensive, perhaps.
Good to know.
There you go.
But that would be the main distinction, I believe.
That's great. Yeah, so aside from that, we're going to be talking about Acts 2 church. We're going to compare that to kind of today's church and just generally, just kind of thoughts about that and how things look different and everything like that. You know, kind of been looking forward to this subject because I think we alluded in one of the other podcasts to where not that a lot of churches do it wrong, because there's really no way to tell, like, is this right or wrong? But really, if, you go back, it's just like, well, none of the churches back then look like the churches we have now, typically. So, just kind of wrestling with that a little bit. Justin, I think you were going to pull up some scripture here to read.
Yeah. So we've touched it briefly in other episodes, but Acts 2, towards the end of that chapter, is kind of when you get into what the Bible would describe as kind of the initial New Testament church. And so I guess it could be part of a larger discussion in terms of, like, is that what church is supposed to look like? This is just kind of what happened initially.
Right.
Is that the blueprint? Because even you look into a lot of Paul's letters, even a lot of the way that they did things kind of would be a little contradictory to what account we get in the initial church.
And you could argue, when were all those epistles written compared to when Pentecost was?
Much later.
Yeah.
Pentecost,
so it didn't even
been,
take, I don't even know how many years. It's obviously maybe 100 years.
So if they were in
or something like that.
Oh, Paul's actual writings, because Paul never met Jesus.
Right.
Well, on the road to Damascus, he never met Jesus
In person,
Jesus was
physically,
walking the earth. Correct.
Right.
But is Acts? I'll wait.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask: is Acts 2 like this is how church should be done?
So I think it's just describing how they were doing
Pentecost.
So
how
what,
they reacted.
Yeah,
right
basically
after.
what happened. Jesus dies, resurrects 3 days later. He's walking around for 40 more days, his final 40 days before he ascends up to heaven or whatever, according to the account. And right before he goes, he basically tells them to all go and gather and wait
to the upper room
just basically go somewhere and wait for the Holy Spirit to fall. And
Right.
then, like, basically saying, like, don't even try to start this thing until, like, you go and wait. And because it's supposed to, he says, like,
Send
you'll
his
receive, like,
helper.
power on high. Like, the idea is, like, the Holy Spirit then is essentially the gasoline that's going to light this thing, right? And so then they go to the upper room and they're there for 120 days. And out of that waiting is what most people would believe is the birth of the New Testament church, where there wasn't like a man-made plan. It was like sit here and wait. And then when it pops off, it's just going to be this organic thing. And they basically just go outside, start, like, the count basically says the Holy Spirit falls. There's like tongues of fire. There's all like mighty rushing wind. There's all these like very kind of like natural but supernatural type of things happening all around. And they go outside and they just start popping off in tongues, speaking tongues. A lot of people think they're wasted. Peter ultimately comes, and it's important to note that the tongues they were speaking in weren't just these like random heavenly language that no one understood. It was like a bunch of people from this region, from Galilee, that came out and were all of a sudden now speaking perfect, whatever dialect or different,
Languages, yeah.
language. And so it was a very, like, people were just like, how's that possible? Kind of thing. Peter then preaches, Christ crucified and resurrected. And then they baptized, and like 3,000 people added to the church that day. And then we get into the account of what it looked like after that, and all of that happened, right? So we pick it up in verse
Wow, great context.
42.
I'm ready. Yeah, that was great.
So Acts 2:42 says they devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes, ate together with glad and sincere hearts. Praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people, and the Lord added their number daily those who were being saved. So it's just, to me, it's very interesting because then I believe it's in Ephesians when Paul's writing to the church in Ephesus is where he so this would be many years later, where Paul is essentially saying, he introduces like the fivefold ministry, which is like apostles, prophets, teachers, pastors. I think I missed one. I don't know. We can look at it. It's not important. But he kind of introduces like the different roles of different spiritual leaders, like in a church. And I've seen analogies or kind of examples where it kind of makes up like a house. Like one is like the covering, the other is more relational. Like pastors, I believe, are supposed to be a little more relational in terms of like shepherd to a sheep, and then certain ones are meant to be more like apostles, where you're not really worried about the sheep so much. It's getting the voice of the Lord, kind of down and applied. But the most interesting part to me, though, is that like this thing happened at such a ground level, like grassroots level, that it just says like each one of them individually was devoted to the teachings of the apostles, and they were just all in, kind of a thing, where like they didn't need so many people like overseeing and babysitting. And I know that's kind of maybe not the best way to say it, but a lot of like spiritual leaders are kind of more or less spiritual babysitters now, just making sure we're kind of, on it, and we're living, the way we're supposed to be living. So it's just interesting because it's like, is this our blueprint? And if it is, the hard part is I think we're just so obsessed in current Western church culture where we just want, we like our numbers, we like butts and seats. And so we get really pumped if we've got like a full sanctuary or full auditorium. But, according, like, what's the real metric of success? Is it butts and seats? That's
a good question.
People raising their hand at the end of a sermon, saying they repeated a prayer?
You could argue
or is it daily living together, everyone individually devoted in a way where it's going to really bring...
What do you think it means when it says, and had all things in common? What do you think that means? I can't imagine all these people were the same person.
No way.
I think that speaks of their material things. I think all the possessions were mixed. I can look at a different translation. That was NIV. I can see what else we have. But
I would say...
So they were communists is what you're saying.
Hot take.
Yeah.
I mean...
I would say
that is what the base form of communism is.
Like, I mean, well, done in a way where it's like certain people aren't taken, like, because communism gets a bad rap because it's like everything's common, and then you have the ruling class not living like everyone else.
Well, so if you define it outside of politics, it's funny. The definition says a political theory derived from. This is like, okay, well,
Karl Marx.
Yeah, it's just
I don't know what is whether it's more of a socialism type of approach where. It's the
so basically it's
an
economic ideology that advocates for a classless society in which all property and wealth are commonly owned instead of by individuals. I wouldn't say that. I don't know that it's necessarily making that entire leap, because it still says that like if someone had need, someone would sell what they have and give it, right? Like so.
Wouldn't it be what they had in common was they believed in the teachings of the apostles? Isn't that what it says right before?
Well, there's another translation that says they held all things in common.
Yeah.
I'm going to look at another
which
version.
I don't know. It could be. But in the context of that, it just says they have all things in common and sold their possessions and goods and divided them among all as anyone had need. It just said that's one sentence.
Right.
Even though it's two different verses. So I believe it's talking about their physical possessions, which is interesting. Sold their possessions and goods.
Well, it says they have
so really
all
it
things
just they
in
collectively
common.
they just collectively owned everything. That's interesting. So you take that and I think this is important because I think that you talk about the church, the first example we see of a church. I think it's important to compare that with what we have, right? Because that's what Paul was doing when he wrote the epistles, right? So he was recognizing that, hey, we've gone pretty far from where this thing started. And and he addresses each church individually, just depending on the issues they were dealing with at each church, right? So really in an attempt to like, hey, let me bring a couple of these things to light here to bring it all back to where, we kind of started, right? And so this is like we're doing the same thing. We're just talking about, because this is an extreme example, but like say you take one of the wealthiest guys in the church and he may be happy to do it, but it's just like, hey, someone has this need over here. You mind selling some stuff, and giving to this person that you don't know. Some people would. Some people would be great, but there's a lot of people I know, right? People that wouldn't feel like they hold anything in common with anyone else who visits the church or is a part of the church. So And,
Well, that's
and
a
part
deep
of it,
thing, bro. When you give someone something that is valuable to you,
right?
I mean,
What I'm saying is humans, it's difficult for this kind of thing to exist in a congregation of a specific kind of or over like a size, right? Because a lot of these things are based on relationship. Of course, anyone
trust,
you
yeah.
have a relationship with, you're gonna do whatever you can for those people.
there's
right?
an element where like you got to trust someone that like if you're falling into hard times and I have the ability to help you, it's like with this understanding of like I trust that you also are gonna be responsible and not squander and be a responsible person in this community, so that if someone else is having a hard time, you can help them at a later date. And I think it's hard sometimes because it's like nowadays we live in these worlds where it's kind of like these got certain people like in this bucket and they just always need help. And so it's like, for me, I don't mind helping people. But if I want to live in community with someone, like I don't need someone that just isn't like working at a level where it's like it's all one-sided.
Well, there's a difference between help and handout.
Right.
Like sometimes to help someone isn't to just give them something. Right?
I agree.
You know?
Yeah.
So
and I think
guess
in this context, it's saying that like there was just if you like all of these people who, if you are actually devoted to the teachings of the apostles, like you're going to have hard times and if people help you, but it's
Yeah.
like you are also responsible to, essentially once someone's helped you, help yourself
Yeah, it's
and then
like
become a contributing member of the community.
Sure.
Yeah, which they talk about this as it's I just don't know how you blow this up into like a big, like how we do church now. It's like you can't have the same principles.
Apples and oranges.
Just
yeah,
because you can't expect all humans in the church to be, when you have that big of a group, you're not going to have a tight relationship with everyone. And then you're not going to be able to, people are just going to be on a scale. Some are going to work harder toward the goal. Some others aren't. And then, it's expected that the needs of everyone will be met. When you don't have a relationship with them, it's just like, clearly these people all cared about each other. And it's when you're in a small group, even if you're that guy who tends to have a natural tendency to slack off when you're in a large group. I think that's a human thing.
Well, look at any group project
so-
in school. Like
Right.
usually one group's got some
Showtime.
slacker that, shows up the day of and
Well,
the
that's
rest of them have to carry the
and
weight.
that's usually, unless you get in a group with your friends and you just have those friends and those people that are still learning life, I guess. But a lot of times you get grouped with random people. You don't have a relationship with those people. You don't really know those people. You're going to be more willing to do that, right? But when there's this relationship that exists there, not only will everyone be provided for, but you'll have those people who have a tendency to be a little lazy. Hey, I have close relationship with these people. I care about these people. I'm motivated to do this, right? And that's what you have to get to. And it's just like, I think the churches at large, there are probably churches that do really good at this. We just don't have that example right now. But there are a lot of times I feel like in the churches that I've been to, at least, a lot of times the cheap attempt at doing this is like they say like small groups, right? To try to build life, build community. And I think that really is the only natural answer you could have to this. Like you have to develop a smaller community. But a lot of people like cheapen that. Like, cause how many times I've been asked, like even being on the worship team, it's like, are you in a small group? It's like, you in a small group? As if it's like just something I got to check off the list. It's like, well, that's not really what a small group is supposed to be. A small group is supposed to be like a group of people you do life together that like mimics really the first, example we have of the church. But it's just, feel like we kind of cheapen it. We like, all right, we're going to get together in a small group, ask a bunch of questions, watch a video, and then kind of talk a little bit and then eat. That's like, we've cheapened this whole experience, right? Like from my perspective.
Well, it was our best attempt. Well, and some of the challenge, we'll get into this a little later, is you see it modeled successfully somewhere else. So it's such human nature to, this element of like, if I'm called here by God to be a spiritual leader to these people, like these are my people that I've been called to pastor. It's like, where is the line of like, how much can you just plagiarize isn't the right word, but like take something that's successful somewhere else, because it's like it's like the whole can duplicate something, but you can't ever really replicate it, kind of a thing. Where it's like this worked for them there, and it's sure. I mean, that's human nature, right? Someone's doing something that works, we try to figure it out. But the challenge of once you institute this whole concept of being a spiritual leader, it's like, okay, so how much are we supposed to be looking to other people for solutions, and how much are we supposed to be looking to God for the real-time solution? It's that whole kairos kind of time concept in the Greek, where it's like for us, for this time kind of a thing. And it's like the more and more it's becoming normalized to just adopt everyone else's system.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not saying right or wrong, but there will be consequences.
Yeah.
In some respect.
Yeah, potentially. You know, Gabby, it'd be interesting to get your take on just what would you say church is? Like, what is it to you? Like, how would you define church? What would be the reason for you ever to go to church?
And just to be around, I guess, like-minded people, if that bunch of people that believe in the same thing.
Yeah. So would you go there looking for like community and, you know, people you could hang with, do life with and stuff? Or you just kind of like looking, okay.
Yeah. I mean, I never would, because I don't think that's the place where I can find community. I feel like I would be judged more than anything walking into a church, but.
Yeah, that's tough. I hate how we like as a,
or
as
I
a
could not
church
be myself
community.
and not be judged.
No, right. And that's not what we need. I mean, that's not what we need in the church community at all.
But like you guys are some of my, closest friends. I mean, I consider all of you guys like my brothers, and you guys go to church, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, I might be making that judgment.
No, I mean, but I'm not arguing with you all. There are definitely people like that, and I hate it. I hate, because I can like a lot of people are. A lot of people are just kind of ignorant to how they come across, and like they're just, I mean, and a lot of people need to be more self-aware of how they are treating people, and they don't have to open their mouth.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people just have that look about them and everything like that.
Oh yeah,
So,
I've seen all those looks.
yeah. Yeah. No, that's tough. That's tough. So Luke, when you first, I think you said you've been, you know, a part of the faith for like what, 4 years, you said?
Yeah.
So how'd that experience start for you? And what brought you to, so did you come to one of these churches that had like the big production, flashing lights, things like that? Or was it more personal? You know, I guess, how did you?
Yeah. I mean, through my childhood, we went to on and off this church called Northland, which is massive. And then, but I guess when I really started this faith journey, I go to a big church, with a lot of people, and they're kind of, I don't know if I'd say system, but they do the small groups thing, and I joined one of those, and so it's kind of like the church that I'm at has a bunch of people, and they have these systems to where like within that giant number of people, you can somehow be a part of a community within it. And to me, it was like I joined a small group, and I'll never forget it. Right. So it was cool and awesome. And the kind of, the tagline about the small groups is like, whatever you normally do, just do it intentionally. Right. So like for us, we could do like, we golf sometimes. What if we just made it a small group? And that's kind of the market for what our church does. And so now all of a sudden when you're golfing, it's like, we're not just golfing, but we're doing it like I'm going to say some words from that Christian video, but like, we're going to fellowship together, right? We're going to do it with intention to like, you know, help each other, encourage each other,
Hold each other accountable.
hold each other accountable. Yeah. All those things. So
is that,
cool.
So that's a specific type of small group that you have, but then are you part of other groups of people that
Yeah.
like where you study or different stuff?
Yeah, there's definitely different kinds of different small groups that have different levels of like depth, I guess.
Sure.
So I was part of one like Thursday mornings, and we would pick a book of the Bible and just like dive into it together, which was cool. And so,
Because because I do struggle with, because I've done these groups before, and a lot of times how it is at churches, many times it's all right. We're going to do an 8-week small group. They usually
Right.
put a time frame on it, which I can't get on board with, because if you're really asking people to be in like kind of like mimic this Acts 2 idea, then you really, you want to continually do life with these people. You want to build. You can't build relationship once a week over 8 weeks. It's not where that's going to happen. And so when you put a time frame on it, a lot of people are like, all right, well, it's done. I don't have to do this on Thursdays anymore.
Right.
You treat it like flag football, like
Right.
my kid.
Yeah.
So and for me, it's like it's cool that there it does exist stuff like, all right, I can have this small group, we can go golfing, we can have this small group where we dig a little deeper, we have this parenting small group, we have this small group.
Right.
But it's almost like I feel like it's in some way it's almost like going to like an ice cream shop, be like, I'll have some of this flavor, some of that flavor, some of that flavor. It's just kind of like where we've gotten to as a culture, right? Where it's just kind of like that's what we're used to. And are we? And I guess I'm not saying either way, because there's valuable things in those, but are we hurting ourselves by not having the same just small group of people we just do everything, like the same people you go deep with, you also go golfing with, or
Sure.
Are we missing something really cool that like was modeled for us that we kind of took and just kind of started doing it our own way, right?
Well, there's like so much, because then you start getting into like capacity. Like I'm not capable of having close relationships with hundreds of people.
Dude, I know.
Absolutely.
That's a big part of this conversation.
Yeah. And so I think if I'm joining a small group, or if I'm leading a small group, like I just kind of have to have that like clear definition of like, am I doing this to find community, or am I doing this to help like disciple somebody? Am I doing this to learn more about the word? Kind of like just be clear about what your goal is, and then communicate it to those people. Like,
Yeah.
I don't have community. I'm just here to like find that. And then expectations are kind of like if someone said that, if I was leading a small group and someone joined it, like, I'm looking for community, I don't really have anyone to, and I know I'm already at capacity with my close relationships.
Yeah.
Then I would say, well, I'm so happy you're here. Like, this is a great step in doing that. And then I'd probably start thinking, because I can't.
Thinking of friends that they would be good with.
Yeah. Like, how can I plug you into a community that would work? Right. So, yeah, I don't know. It's definitely a hard balance because if you do, I have friends where I go golfing with, and then we'll dive deep. Like, some of my closest friends are those types of people that we can just do everything, but I can't have an unlimited amount of those people.
Right.
So then how do you do that? Right. And
It's
no one
super
has
tough.
it perfect, but
No one has. I mean, I'm not saying that doing life exactly like this is even realistic in our
Right.
culture, right? But we're really just trying to point out, like, hey, we may have gone way past the mark, and we may need to just like do some rethinking about this, because, one of the funny things when you were talking, I was just like, all right, we should just have a matchmaking website for small groups or community groups, whatever you want to
sure.
call them. And like, hey, most of the things won't work out, but maybe you bring people together that can just be like best friends or whatever. Mm-hmm.
Christian Tingle.
Christian Tingle.
But even like on that, like, I've met so many people through my church that some of them I would say I'm doing life with.
Yeah.
And some others I would say are like, it sounds weird, but like a step down from that, where like we're friends. I know what's going on in their life and vice versa, but like, they're not my person I call, or like, you know what I mean? Like, there's levels and I don't think that's a bad thing.
No, it's chemistry. I mean, there are definitely people like that too. Not that I devalue those people in my life in any way.
Right. It's part of life.
Yeah, it's part of life. Some people you click with, some people you just have a natural, you get along. I mean, you can, and really the biggest part of that is, I would say, sometimes it's not even like common interest. More so, sometimes it's just like a person's ability to have like grace for you.
Sure.
And you have grace for them. And then like, and really, that's a Christian term, but what that means is like, you know, hey, you like screw up or say something to me that like is probably offensive or something, and it's just my ability to look past that and just see you as you and just value the relationship. That's huge. I mean, because it's easy to get along with people and like get together and have fun talking about things that you like certain types of whiskey distilleries or, you know, like sports or whatever it is. But then like when someone does something and they piss you off, you know, the ability to show them grace, I mean, and their ability to reciprocate that is just like huge that I've felt, you know, before. But the thing I wanted to go back to that you said is our inability to have friends with thousands of people.
Yeah.
That's tough.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it almost feels like it's expected. You know, we have these, you know, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, like, you know, you could see all the followers, right? You could just have, you know, hundreds of thousands of friends on Facebook.
Yeah.
But then how many people you're really close with? And then people that try to like overdo it. A lot of times, like, you know, people that are big personalities online don't have many close friends, right? So some people, you know, some people do, and some people do it fine and they have their life and all that stuff, and that's great. But then some people like treat all their friends online as their friends when no one's really their friend. You know? So
and everything in between.
Yeah. And I feel like this whole idea has kind of made its way into the church where, you know, we kind of treat a lot of these friends at church like our Facebook friends that we barely talk to. And then, you know, we go there, we have all these surface level conversations and then go home. And then it's like, well, it'll be nice to see all those people next week.
Right.
You know, so when we talk about how big the churches are, I mean, I find it overwhelming, you know, because I would say that a lot of my, I mean, like you can't avoid the clicks going on, right? Because it's like people, I think, naturally want this. They want the Acts 2 experience. But then it's like, how do you tell someone? Because I've been in that situation, man, where it's just like, especially new people that come to the worship team, because the worship team is kind of not a clique, but it's like,
It's a community.
It's our community. We're with each other so much. It's a big commitment. We're there multiple days a week.
Well, and you have the element where you're on stage and you're in the light, like the spotlight. So there's that whole element.
Similar
where
experience. Makes sense.
But it's just like, we really don't have capacity to like go into the lobby and meet a bunch of new people, you know, and it's almost disingenuous. If I'm trying to go out there and to pretend that I'm interested in having a relationship with all these people, it's like, I don't have the capacity, right?
Sure.
Well, it's like one layer under pastor, right? Because we used to have these conversations where it's like, hey, these people are on stage, they're seeing them every week, so I recognize a face. So it's like, I mean, it's kind of annoying that this is the reality, but like when someone that you see on the stage every week comes and has a conversation with you, I mean, we have these conversations. We're just like, would it be more impactful? Like, should we go out there and meet people because they see our faces up on the cameras every week? And
well, I mean, I get the heart behind
that gets in a little more of a manipulative kind of
because it's like
with good intentions.
Well, we want the people on stage to seem like real people, like they're not trying to like separate themselves from everyone. You know,
which is interesting though, because the Levite, like you look at like biblical precedents, like back in the Old Testament, the Levites were pretty separated, right?
That Jesus changed that. The church totally changed. Old Testament was like a place. New Testament. So this is a question that, like,
but Davidic
when
worship
you ask
was meant to be here for the last days. So there's a distinction between like the worshipers.
So,
kind of a sense.
But my question would be like, we struggle with today.
Well, Jesus also brought together Jew and Gentile. So
what is the church, right? And a lot of times we get, like, my thought is there's so many people that go to church that aren't a part of the church, right?
But they think they are. That's the problem.
Well, yeah. So
we're not really.
What I'm saying is the church isn't like a place or a system or the Bible tells us that the church is believers in Jesus. So like, I am the church, right? And I am the sign. Everyone who is like-minded in belief in Jesus and the story of Jesus is also a part of the church. And so when we put like,
where'd we get off then? Or where'd we get off on that? Like, so is it like, because you ask 100 out of 100 people, you ask, what's the church? And they'll say, well, it's a building that, you know,
right.
Or at least
together.
Most people aren't going to, because I agree with you. I think the problem then is when we all agree that the church is not the building, it's the people, then you're just like, okay, so our budget is $5 million and a lot of that is going to the building. Like that's, I think.
But but I would say, yeah, but the building is a place for the church to meet.
Sure.
So I guess what I'm saying is like
That's
when
the hard part in like the Acts account where you add 3,000 people, which obviously they can't meet in any building back then.
Sure.
Right. And then you read throughout Acts, most of the references of the church are just from home to home. So it's like something happened where 3,000 people joined, but kind of in a similar sense, they formed like smaller communities and were just meeting home to home.
Right. Like I would say this is church right now.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's the switch that a lot of people don't have perspective wise, because they go to church and then they leave the church and like, we'll go to church again. No, like you are the church. So like wherever you go with other believers is the church. Right. And so it makes way more sense that way than like putting all the pressure on this one day, this one experience.
Agreed.
Versus that's not what it's meant to be. Right. So.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think what Justin was kind of getting to was that, you see here, it's just like they held all things in common, and they sold their possessions and goods and divided them among all as everyone had need. Mm-hmm. Right now, it's like, well, we give a small portion of what we have to the common goal, and most of that goes into building and facilities.
And staff and all that.
Yeah, so it's not so much people's needs, it's more so just the needs of the people that have to run the church now, because it's grown to this thing. You know, I'm not saying it's like wrong. We've just had to kind of keep up with the way things and people are now. I mean, but it's interesting because it creates these unique stresses. So I talked about the worship team being my community, but at the same time, it's just like I almost don't have interest in talking to other people, and I'm not saying that as like this pompous jerk. I'm not trying to be that.
You just mean like not getting super close.
Yeah, and
like
that's tough because people will come to the worship team and it's like we'll hit it off. We'll have great conversation like in the green room about whatever stuff that we have interest in and stuff like that. But then it's like you can just tell that person wants community. Mm-hmm. They don't have it. Mm-hmm. And it's just like, how do I, in a nice way, like just be like, hey, I just don't have room for more close relationships in my life.
Yeah, right.
Because either way, you sound like a jerk.
Yeah,
The bigger problem is like we've talked about this before, but it's like, so the name of the podcast, Religiously Offensive. Like the reality that people, it's not pretty, but the reality is an offense is an action, something that happened. But being offended is ultimately a choice. Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah. So it might be a gut level emotional reaction, but there's also ways to sit in it and sit with it. And like you can get to a place in life where you don't have to respond to things emotionally and you choose your reaction to things. Yeah. But at the end of the day, like being offended is a choice. It may be subconscious and you may not realize it.
Yeah.
But being offended by things that happen that ultimately you're making a judgment on.
Yeah, no, you're right. I guess more so
say people are just too easily offended.
Is for
what
sure.
I was getting at. Like thin skin. Like if you genuinely don't have time for someone, like we should, as adults, be able to be like, bro, I'm just going to shoot it straight with you. Like, I just don't, like, my life is a little too crazy right now. I just don't have time for another. Yeah. Because I personally don't want more surface level relationships.
And there's some pastors
really
that'll just say that from the
stage.
stage. Like, and I admire that.
Yeah,
like,
I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Yeah. And
we're just not, we don't want to offend people. So we kind of walk on eggshells and we leave the door half open when we should have just been like, hey, bro, sorry. Like, at least in this season of life,
it's worse. It's worse when you try to commit to somebody and then you fail as a friend.
Because then it's like it becomes this every month. It's like they're trying to get lunch with you, and you're just like, I should have just told this dude straight up. It's like, sorry, man, not right
But
now.
then if you think like, so that conversation happens, and then that person is like, maybe a little down, whatever their reaction would be. That's normal. If you're a part of a church that is like about community and wants to build community, it like you could go to your community and ask like, hey, does anyone have any idea of how we could help?
Sure.
You know what I mean? Like it doesn't have to end there. Like, hey, bro, sorry, and then just go find it somewhere else. Like we're a part of this giant community that has communities within the community. Let's see if we can work together to help.
Which are technically described as denominations. It's just funny. Denomination. We read the definition of that, and it's a group within the church. That's all it says.
Sure.
So it's just cliques. I mean, it's human nature, though.
But if you said like, yeah, I've got my own denomination inside our non-denominational church. Like,
well, technically, according to the definition, it is all the church.
Yeah, it is.
Even other denominations.
Yeah.
When,
so our
when, and when churches go
non-denomination
non-denom,
is a denomination.
When they
They're
go
just
non-denomination,
their own
it's-
denomination.
the hard part, the hard part is
I'm
like
confused now.
the tricky thing is like I grew up in they call it a fellowship, but it's essentially the same thing where it's this governing body, right? So there's overseers on the state and national and global level where if things are going and for a lot of reasons, people like it because there's accountability. You know, it's like that's their way of making sure that none of these churches, because I mean, on a very like they not on a really big scale, but the idea is, you know, some of the churches will help others and stuff like that, and like there is like a community pot, but it's only like I think you're supposed to give 10% of your revenue to the district. You kind of the church ties to the fellowship or whatever, but. I mean, there's the element
church corporation.
Yeah, so there's the element where you like it because you have overseers. So it's like if someone tries to do something that's not really biblical, you know, someone can step in. But at the same time, like if I think about like if I really believe that God has called me to lead these people, it's like I'm thankful for a board or mentors. But like someone who's not involved in my church in my life, like sorry, bro, like I don't like. You can weigh in with your opinion, but unless you're here day in and day out. Like I trust my relationship with the Lord more than I trust you and your relationship to this church. Like end of the day, I think that's the problem is we get into this weird territory where people are like, oh, we can't have that because pastors are going to go off and do crazy things. Maybe. But like end of the day, those pastors, like that's why the most successful, and probably not the best word, but the most successful people are just, they figured it out for themselves and they're like, this is what we do. Like a Stephen Furtick. It's just, this is what we do. Now he's got board members, he's got people, but like he's not in this denomination where people are basically like policing his decisions and saying like, hey, we didn't like you did that there. Or we need to, and then they have power to remove people from, you know, places of leadership. So I think,
well, the funny thing is it's, you look at a denomination like the AG to where you have the head office, the national office, the state offices, and then the churches. It's just like, all right, we're depending on this governing body to give us our instruction, how we should be teaching, what we should be doing, how we should be living our lives, and all these things. And it's just like people then start to look toward the structure more so than they do the word.
Sure.
mm-hmm.
So one would argue that being a non-denominational church that's taking everything that they're doing directly from the word and not from some governing body could be closer to Christ or the way that, you know,
at least the way
example that was set.
the blueprint that we have.
Yeah. So it's just like, are these huge organizations that really resemble like Walmart, you know, and some of their corporate structure, is this really the way? I mean, that almost exaggerates what we're even saying, right?
Yeah.
Have we got into the whole franchising topic and all that stuff?
No, we have not. But I would just to finish up the one thing about the thought is just it's tough because not that it's anyone's specific fault. It's tough though living the life, you know, that I'm living as a volunteer in the church, and I have to continually just, you know, dread the fact that like I'm not able to help these people, I'm not able to do life with these people, and then I feel like there's nothing for those people. And I take that weight on, right? Like that's a heavy like burden, because I feel like if you don't have a relationship, then you're gonna at some point just as a person, like let alone like being a part of the faith or in the church, I'm just like, you need that care as a person, and I just don't feel like this guy's getting that right now, and I'm not available to give it. I mean, granted, you could tell people like, hey, you know, I think this guy really needs community. If you know anyone, you know, you could tell other leaders and stuff like that, but.
Because I guess my
there's
question,
just so much of that, and we need to do a better job connecting people, and it's just like it's not. We can't just keep like having these like small group signups in the lobby to where like, oh, you just sign up with other random people because you want to talk about this thing.
dude. I tried to do this
because
for
you're,
years.
You're starting with a common subject without taking into any consideration chemistry.
Well, it's dude.
But isn't
these are
that
social.
wise to start? Because how could you start with chemistry if you don't know someone?
But these are
I know,
social
but
experiments. We all go to high school.
What I'm saying is is there a better way to match people based on chemistry to where it's not?
Well, I guess part of it is the people have to. Here's part of it. They have to want it themselves.
Yeah,
We can want it for them so much. We want community for this guy.
To a detriment.
But if he doesn't pursue, like he has interests and desires and things he has in common with people. And so if he wants to sign up for a small group, like you can't force him to find community. you could put things in place to where if he wanted it, he can have. This is something I'm passionate about because people go to church all the time and they're like, oh, I don't have community, no one there. You know, people feel like
It's the consumerism.
and
They just want.
right.
Yeah.
And so I'm like,
They want it all to come to them.
I went to
Yeah.
the same church and had a different experience, but why? Is it because you're just kind of like depending on people to make decisions for you, put you in places for you, or are you going to make a decision like, no, I'm going to find community myself. I'm going to go to the awkward thing one time, see if there's someone I can, because at the end of the day,
gotta put yourself
you
out there.
can't be responsible for someone else's life. You could set up things and systems to where if they really desire it, they can thrive. And I think that's all we could do, right?
I mean, end of the day, we all go through this. Like, we all go to high school, and we all have to go into this. Like, I went to Ohio State. It's like, dude, I would have when I was at Ohio State, Terrell Pryor, who was like the #1 recruit coming in, and he was supposed to be like the next like Tom Brady. Well, that doesn't matter. He was like massive recruit, right? I had his jersey. Like, I go to Ohio State, and it's like, of course, I want to be homies with Terrell Pryor, but like, I can't be homies. Like, if I meet him and it happens, great. But I feel like everyone goes into experiences where it's just like, oh, I want to hang out with like the varsity cheerleaders and I want to hang out with these guys. Like, we go into high school and it's like, that's nice for you.
I want to be the, I want to be the lead pastor's best friend.
Right.
Well, that's what we do. Everyone wants to be close to the leadership and influence. It's like, we all go to like experiences in social environments and you have to learn. It's just like, where do you fit in here?
Right.
And it's not their job. Like, this is why, dude, I was on staff and I would just beg them for years, like to be, not years, but it was a solid month, like few months. So massive exaggeration. But I was once it wasn't happening. I've wanted to do this, but it was clearly not happening. So I just gave it up.
Speak of it.
If we have 2 services that start at 9 and 11, one ends and then the other one starts, and we have like a 30 to 45 minute gap, why would we not every single Sunday just throw a party in that gap? Literally just have food, have fun things for the kids to do, just hanging out. Because it's like, we're so good at getting people in and out in an hour and 15 so we don't burden their Sunday. But the whole experience is cold. You come in, you sit down, we turn off the lights, we play loud music, and then we run through our flow, and then they have a sermon, and then everyone leaves and gets lunch, and that's it. Like, we don't put any amount of time. Like, that's why when you read the Acts 2 account, when they gathered daily, by the way, when they gathered, it wasn't, and the early church gathered and they sat in a room and they all didn't say anything and they watched someone talk at them for an hour and then they went home and did their own things. Like, it's like, but that's what we do. And so it's like, how are we not spending legitimate time every Sunday when this is the only time that we all gather? Because that was my whole point. It's like, everyone's always asking questions like, how do we get more people into small groups?
This is something that smaller churches do better than bigger churches.
And you're just like,
a lot of them will have like potlucks and things,
and they get a bad rap. But it's like, dude, you gotta do something building community corporately while we're all together every week. Because if you're in a church
just
with
a little
thousands
mixer,
of people,
you know,
dude, that's exactly. If you have thousands of people in your church, there's no chance that like someone there isn't like your tribe. Like, you're gonna connect with people eventually,
for sure.
But to like go in and being like, oh, like I really want to be close to this person or that person. If it doesn't happen, then we just like try to force it. And if it doesn't work, then we're butthurt and we leave and we say like that church was trash.
Right.
Da, 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 da. It's like, no, like there's a massive element.
Since you brought it up,
responsibility.
I was like sitting there just. Were you gonna finish that thought?
No,
I felt like you were rambling, so I just interrupted you.
We just gotta provide opportunities for people every Sunday. If we really say community is what's important.
Yeah, so
we don't need to just preach at them.
Since you brought it up, I was really trying to just think of names for that party, and I don't know why.
The squad pod?
No, it's like, I don't know, like Party in the Gap or like the Sunday Rager.
Well, it doesn't even need a name. Just start providing food.
It needs to have
provide
a name.
food.
No, you need to have
jams.
A name. No, you need to have a name.
Things to keep children busy. I mean, name it if you want, but just like
no, you need to brand it. You need to make it a thing.
And honestly,
you need to make it something people want to go to.
It's time to start like really investing in like opportunities like that. That it's like, I feel like we'll invest in marketing if it brings people in the doors. We'll invest, and it's like,
what do you do about parking though?
But to me, what you're saying
figure it out.
is like a giant small group.
Well, you provide, because if you only go to a small group and there's thousands of people in your church and you go to a small group with like 10 other people, there's a very good chance that those 10 people aren't going to be your homies. You can try another one. Those 10 people probably won't be your homies.
Why do you think that?
I'm just saying
It's very
I'm not
rare.
saying that it can't happen.
It happens, but it's really
but
rare.
like
What's rare?
but in
that
like back
the
to the high
people,
school
the random
example.
people you get paired with in a small group, you continue to do life with for years.
Well, and it can almost get dangerous too, because we can be like, well, those like we're gonna trust them, we're gonna like because we'll get your interest and we're gonna pair you and like we're gonna like believe God's putting you in the right group. It's like, okay, when I go to high school, like how did I start developing like social skills? We would go to the football game Friday nights, and it was all of the kids there, and it was you just start to develop.
Not everyone was
Wait,
popular
so
like you, Justin.
You just
No, not even in
described-
that sense.
You just described church to me. Friday night is Sunday,
Yeah, but
and everyone's there,
But-
and then you can go meet people and
okay,
connect.
here's the difference.
Then you go do your thing.
And I agree with you, but here's the difference. When we would go to those games on Friday nights, it quickly turned into this thing where like we didn't really watch the game. It was all the kids were hanging out under the bleachers or in the back. It was like there was a show going on, but it was like, nah, we're good. Like we can get the score later. If we're all here, I want to start like socializing and I want to start connecting with people. And I feel like
Well, it's the opposite
what we
with
don't do at
church.
church is we just focus on the show.
We go to watch the
and we
game.
don't give people the time to
well, what's
really.
the point of Sundays then?
I think it's fellowship, which is
Is
another
that it?
Christian word. Well, the problem is in Acts,
what we would define it as now is the point of Sunday is to get a message, something that basically get fed, and then your worship is just to have congregational worship, which is obviously a thing.
which I don't think is biblical from the Acts 2 account, because I don't think it's the pastor's job to feed you. Like it's very clear that it said like they were all individually devoted to the teachings of the apostles. So it's because they were all individually devoted.
So-
they spent their time together, just felt like having fun, chilling, breaking
So what
bread.
I was saying is the understanding of church that we would probably have now versus what Justin's saying. We should spend more time on Sundays fellowshipping and really just kind of building relationship. Yeah, I don't.
Is Acts 2 the only
I mean,
the
That's
only
just the
thing that
birth.
we should base?
That's how we.
No.
Because
I mean,
if
that's-
you read Acts 2, it starts with a sermon. Well, a sermon's a big part of it.
Well, it's just repent. It's Jesus died for you. Come to the Lord, and then it's when once you're part of the family, then
So
it was
he
just
presents the gospel.
right. Yeah, no, trust me, I'm down. Oh, I think you should always present the gospel.
I'm just asking questions.
But
'cause
it's-
the point of Sunday can't just be the difference between a football game Friday night and church on a Sunday is the football game is a source of entertainment, where Sunday, if you're a believer, is meant to like help sharpen you, fuel you up to go out and reach more people, to go out and spread the message more. Sunday is more of like a, hey, let's get together, let's worship, let's dive into the word, let's.
Well, that's what it has to be now, and I agree.
It's
I guess
almost-
I'm saying
it's almost as because
it has to be that now. We don't get time to fellowship because no one's really diving in on their own. It's like the problem with it's like this epidemic of secondhand revelation. Basically, people aren't really diving into the scriptures and chewing on it for themselves vertically.
Sure, yeah.
So they go to spiritual communities so they can like basically
Secondhand
it's
belief.
It's like an animal that feeds their babies, and like, was it birds? They eat the meal and then they regurgitate it for the little baby because the baby can't feed itself.
Yeah.
And Paul even addresses this, talking about like the milk versus the meat phrase.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, I think because we've made the goal butts and seats without realizing it, that it's like, okay, so we're not really equipping these people to really, really feed themselves. And so when we gather, we have to devote most of our time to just teaching.
But wouldn't
that.
if we changed it to, if we switched church into like a Sunday party or whatever your example was,
It doesn't need the whole time. I'm just saying like 10 minutes.
But aren't you adjusting? Aren't you enabling? I guess my point is, it shouldn't be the church's responsibility for the individual. I'll say it like this: you should, as a pastor or as a church, encourage people to have an individual faith. Like on a
You
Sunday,
have to.
someone should leave and say, "I need to dive in the Word for myself." And if they don't do that, then you can't base the entire Sunday off of the fact that these people aren't going to dive in. So let's change something so that we
I
can
think
get
step
I don't
one is
think-
get some data. Like literally,
I don't
how
think-
many of you people are actually spending time doing this each week?
right. That's
Genuinely.
the problem. You need
And
to
it's
be
like,
preaching that. Like,
you need
this
to know
needs to
how many
go-
people, because if 90% of your church isn't really wrestling through these things individually,
That's
then
something you
what's
need
the
to confront.
point?
Yeah,
Like, you need to fix that culture.
100%.
Like people need
yeah.
to really own it for themselves.
Because when they do, then it takes care of itself.
That's
then your
what I-
small groups are life giving. Then your
Well-
small group leaders
well-
turn small group leaders, and it never stops.
It's you don't have to do all of this babysitting and overseeing. It's like you really empower people.
But there's a difference
And
between
then we
accountability
gather.
and babying.
Well, right, but I just feel like all we do now is babysitting.
A lot of us turned into babying.
I don't see that, but maybe some places.
Yeah, it just depends on the place, the church experience,
Mm-hmm.
and a lot of things we bring up on here. Not every church is going to feel this way,
For sure.
but this is just based on a lot of our experiences. So we're not all going to have the same experiences, and that's fine.
Well, I think there's also an element where pastors, it's human nature. It's like, what do you mean? Like how many pastors would really have the, you know what, to just literally say like, I'm not even going to teach for a month. We're going to dive into some simple principles, but we're going to take a month and really like develop community
It's
here.
tough. Inadvertent.
Because if we're only here for an
Yeah.
hour and a half,
No, for sure. I think that's
it's like
I think
there's an
that's good.
element where
one of the we've inadvertently, like you were saying, we've inadvertently created this idea in people's head that church is just something you go and consume, and then
Yeah.
you go about your week
Totally wrong.
until you can consume it
passive
again.
bystanders. Well,
But
we're conditioning them that way.
You ask a lot of people, like leadership in the church, they would not define it that way, right? But to most people, that's like how they view it, right? So, and I unfortunately, it's just kind of like it's people kind of just assume and kind of get these ideas of what's important based on what the church provides. So if we're saying that, you know, we do worship for 15 minutes and then we do a sermon for 40 minutes and then we do worship for another 5 minutes after that, we're saying that, like, all right, the most important thing is to come and listen to this guy talk. And then the second most important thing is worship. And then they've told us that we have to hurry up and get out of our parking spot so other people can come in. So there's no room for community. So they just don't see the community modeled within that every Sunday environment right now. And I think that's tough. Like, honestly, I think messages are too long. I think pastors are very redundant and they just feel like they're doing their job. And so they go a long time. I mean, and that, you don't need a message just that, like, to have a fiery word, you know, come from the Lord. It could be 5 minutes. It could be 50 minutes.
I
It
bet
doesn't
you
matter.
Peter's in Acts 2, I bet he was talking for like 5 minutes or less.
Dude, well, and that's the thing. We feel like that there needs to be all of this talk, all of this, you know, all of this substance, when really, like, we have this long message, and really, like, you ask most pastors about their messages, they have like a couple of bullet points, right? They have like a few like really important things that they want people to take away, but they hide it in all of this like big long thing that they're telling people. So this is personal. This is my personal thought, is like, I just think messages need to be shorter. And I mean, you know, worship is one, like worship, like there are churches that have like an hour and a half long worship set. And then a lot of churches will just do like a few songs on the front end, song on the back. It's whatever, right? Because biblically, a lot of these people, they did get together for corporate worship, but it wasn't very often. It wasn't as often as we do every week. That really doesn't matter as much. I mean, personally.
Well, again, it's one of those things where people probably aren't doing it a lot.
But if we had a shorter message, right? For example, this is just one way you could do it. If you had a shorter message, you gave an extra 15 minutes to people to actually fellowship in the lobby. And like, you know, there doesn't have to be a special emphasis. It's just like, hey, we've relaxed this time frame to where, you know, you can now just kind of get to know some people, you know, figure out who you want to do life with or can do life with or whatever. And then you move your cars. So it's like, I just feel like there's probably a different way we could emphasize things that maybe could help some people. You know,
Sure.
I don't know. So I was going to ask, so does Rachel tell you much about her growing up? And
Not really, no.
okay. Yeah, because I was just curious, like, I was just wondering to know, like, you know, how she views church, having grown up in it and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, she hid who she was until she was out of church.
Yeah. Yeah, it's unfortunate. I mean, it's the way a lot of people feel like they have to do it. What were you going to say, Luke?
I was going to say, I think a common, I don't know if I'd say issue, maybe I'd say issue, is that church, there's too much emphasis on Sundays, and people just put all of their expectations, all of their whatever you want to call it, on a Sunday experience.
That's the big production. Yeah.
For sure.
And even, you know, I think Sundays are important and you should go on a Sunday. But if church is only for you on a Sunday and not for the whole week, then of course you're going to be upset with a Sunday because it's not going to fit everyone's expectations if all you're expecting is what you want, it's just dangerous, because if you go in with a consumer mindset, what do you even, if it's all about you, then it's not about God, then you're just missing the whole. And so I think whoever's in the pulpit, whoever's preaching, needs to touch on the reason we're there, the reason we're,
Right.
all those things are important, but Sunday can't be the only thing. It just can't, because you won't reap the benefits of having a relationship with Jesus if all you do is go Sunday.
And the simple test of that is, from Sunday to Sunday, who from Sunday do you see elsewhere during the week?
100%.
Do you see anyone?
Well, yeah.
Then you start diving into Acts 2,
you start
where
having
you
just
hang out day to
conversations with
day.
people. Yeah, I mean, because most churches, if you're not providing time to really be able to mingle, like, and just meet whoever's there, you're basically hoping that the church is just going to pick your friends for you by going into like this small group pot. And it's like, people are pretty good at figuring things out and figuring out who their friends are. Like, it's just, I don't know why we have this hesitation to really let them do that. And then
Here's another thing that I learned this weekend.
Some people don't make friends very easily.
There's
That's true.
there was a question, our church did a Q&A, and someone asked, like, is it a bad thing if I go to 2 different churches at the same time? And the answer was, like, he probably wouldn't say it's a bad thing, but if you try and plant yourself somewhere and every time you change like pots of soil and replant yourself, you're probably not going to grow very well. Right. And so my point of saying that is, like, find your church that like they're preaching the gospel, right? Once you agree that that's happening, plant yourself there, and don't give it a week or a month, or don't go in like, oh, I didn't like their worship the way I like the other ones, with that consumer mindset. Like, plant yourself there and see if your roots are growing and your relationships thrive. Just like, because if you keep removing yourself, you're never going to live in the benefits
it's like the
of a
people that we
church.
talked about, like it was with that simple test question. Do you see anyone throughout the week? It's probably those people that see no one throughout the week that feel like they have the freedom to be like, oh, I can go here, I can go here,
100%.
and I can go here.
And it's those people that never, that complain the most.
But I feel I agree with you, but I think ultimately the church leadership needs to set the tone where, like, if you have people like that, because I agree, because I think we can get into this dangerous area where we just, like, if we're hurting for volunteers, we'll do a whole sermon series on like serving and why it's so important, right? And it's like, people understand biblical principles because they make sense. Bottom line, it's common sense, it's practical if you're really real with it. The problem is, like, we'll do things like that and we talk about how important it is to be planted in a house. And so it's just like, it can quickly move into this thing where it's just like, okay, like, so I'm supposed to devote, my, maybe not my life, but devote a good part of my life to this place. Mm-hmm. And it's like, do I really feel like I'm getting a good return on investment? Like,
sure.
And that's why I think, like, we need more churches out here, just like, that are willing to just say, like, hey, we're going to prioritize community. And if I ask for people to plant themselves here, we're going to set the pace and we're going to start it and be generous to them. We're going to facilitate opportunities where we're going to figure out how to have, like, childcare taken care of.
Yeah.
So parents can go out and, like, have a date night and they don't have to worry about finding a babysitter.
Sure.
I mean, however you want to do it, like,
Right.
just practical ways we can start, like, actually helping the people that are there.
Yeah.
And so I think
that.
we just need to, like, what would happen if a church actually, like you said, we look at a budget and it's like, instead of giving away 10% of our budget to help people, what if we did the whole Rick Warren reverse tithe thing and we just, like, radically were generous with the people here? And because it's like, for me, we don't need to spend more money on marketing and social media and billboards. I mean, those things will get people in your door.
Yeah.
But again, the Bible's pretty clear that God was adding to their numbers daily the people being saved because they were just living in that kind of community. Or Jesus telling Peter, I will build my church. Like, we are so obsessed with getting people in the door and butts and seats that, like, we've missed the forest for the trees, and
Wait,
we're just
read
telling
that part.
people.
Read that.
Read what?
I remember reading it where Jesus is going to build the church, because
Where Jesus tells Peter,
yeah.
on this rock I'll build my church, and the
Right.
gates of hell won't prevail. Yeah.
because there's a difference between, in my opinion, trying to reach people to come to church and then allowing Jesus to truly save them to join the church.
Because he's just saying, I tell you that you're Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell won't prevail.
What's the one where he's like, I will bring the people to the church? I think it's in Acts. I will supply, the Lord will supply. Because there is a responsibility of the church to reach people. But whether they're saved or not is not
So again, though, we're conflating, like, we think it's the responsibility of the church, the corporate structure, to help save people, when it's like the church is the people. It's always been meant to be
not to help save
hands,
people,
like,
but to reach people.
Well, all of it. Like, it's always meant to be just like straight up.
You have
like
to go
networking and word of mouth.
He was pointing out that once the people are in the doors, it's not our responsibility to save them.
Right.
It's just like it was just the church's responsibility to kind of like
to go reach
take the word to people, but you can't control what people do with that.
Right.
Sure. I'm just saying how much of corporate dollars in this analogy are spent to try to get the people in the doors.
Yeah, I think that's maybe a different thing. And
why?
What? Huh?
I guess I'm wondering, why is that a problem? Spending money to try and get people in the door.
Just because to me, it goes back to these stories of like Acts 2, where it says like the Lord is the Lord is adding daily to their numbers.
That's the one I want to. That's the one I want.
That's Acts. Yeah, that's Acts 2. Yeah, that's the one we read earlier, where it talks about the way they lived, and then the very end it just says, and the Lord added to their numbers daily those who are being saved.
Right. Those who are being saved.
So it's living. Yeah.
So I think, Justin, what you're saying is that I think what Justin's really trying to say is that personally, we have to meet people where they're at.
Yeah.
And a lot of that is through advertising, billboards they pass, like whatever. So I think that it gets tough when we're putting up billboards with the senior pastor's face all over it. We've got things that are just kind of like, I don't know, self-edifying.
It's hard because
the church does do things that's more like, hey, come to our brand. Don't go to that other church.
Yeah, and that's wrong.
That's the feeling of a lot of that advertising effort is almost like, hey, just come to our church now.
Sure.
So that's wrong. And that goes into a whole topic which we're going to cover.
It's totally wrong. Yeah.
About we're all on the same team.
Right.
But it's like a lot of people are butting heads over everything.
I think end of the day, like this model basically says they pulled resources together, and the resources were meant to help those in need in the community.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Problem is now we're pulling resources together, and most of it's being spent to reach people outside of the community.
Not in my church.
Well, So this is, I don't want to make a blanket statement, but generally,
right.
Like, we have like the nice buildings, the nice auditoriums, like the nice sound systems. Like, we want to impress people. So it's like, I don't know. It's just
as humans, we're never going to agree on the best way to do that. I mean, you could say that
for sure.
To me, it's just though, if the Bible is nothing more than like the blueprint, and Jesus is the example, and we're supposed to follow him, most of what he did was setting aside his divinity, becoming fully man, completely reliant on the kingdom of heaven to do everything. Mm-hmm. And now it's just like, I feel like we pretty much do the opposite.
We definitely have a problem with that.
Pull dollars, and then we're not really relying on heaven to provide supernaturally for anything.
Yeah, that is a big issue. We find our security.
What we think heaven's supplying supernaturally is just, we'll just keep asking people for their money, and then eventually we hit our number.
Yeah, I mean, and the other thing too is we have put the wrong emphasis on giving. On it's almost like if I give money to the church, they'll figure out a way to use it to advertise or do whatever and get people in the door. Instead of me, showing people my faith, I'll just depend on the church. I
guess I'm just saying,
use the resources I give it to. Since I don't have time,
right? I'm just saying, like, what if a church actually did that? And it's like, it's not that we don't care about, it's like the same thing with like, why do we lock our doors? Why do we have fences? It's like, it's not because we don't like people out there. It's because we love the people in here. And it's like, we're building this. And that's my whole thing. It's like, you steward or you manage where you're at and trust God to bring the right people into your community. I mean, that's when I read the Bible.
Yeah.
And I think
that's why I love my church, because I feel like they do that.
Yeah. And I don't know a lot about your church. I'm not trying to judge anyone. I'm just saying it would be nice to see communities or spiritual communities where they really, really lived this thing out. And it was, And it was really meant to be about like the fellowship and like the actually gathering and breaking of bread on a regular basis.
What's interesting is in Acts 20, fact check me, type it in. Someone says, it must be Paul, but he says they met once a week, and it's the same book. And I think
so. The Acts is just the Acts of the Apostles. So I forget exactly who wrote it.
Probably Paul.
I don't think it was.
No.
But I guess I'm just saying.
Luke.
Oh.
Luke. Okay.
Oh, hello.
Oh, hi. It's me.
What a name.
Dr. Luke.
What a name he's got.
Or at least that's a consensus.
Dr. Luke.
But like, so the Acts is, it means Acts of the Apostles.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So it's just basically the Apostle Jesus post his, ascension and how the church ultimately started.
Right.
So,
but I'm just saying there's a verse in Acts 20 that talks about they meet once a week. And so I think that's on purpose because now you have both. I feel like the Bible oftentimes gives you a lot of different things so that you're not hung up on the religious repetition of one certain thing and you get obsessed with the formula instead of Jesus.
Well, it's just
so that talks about gathering weekly to break bread and take communion.
Right. Where in Acts 2 it says do it daily. So then it's like, okay.
Well, I think Acts 2 is just accounting how they did it.
Right.
How it started. And then it's like anything though. It's like you start a workout, you start any sort of like positive habit. You're like hardcore every day, and then it's like, I'll start doing it every other day. I'll just do it like weekly.
Yeah.
It's like anything in life. Like the more you do it, the more beneficial it's going to be.
So we're getting past an hour and 10 minutes or I don't want to cut this off because I think it's great.
Yeah, I enjoyed this. It's definitely worth talking about.
What was that?
But you're going to.
Well, I'm going to.
Yeah.
Well, I'm confident a lot of these themes are going to keep coming up.
Yeah.
Well, we do
it's
need to
not
dive in.
I know
to the
we'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll do that in another episode.
I mean that can apply in many different arenas. But I think ultimately, I in the beginning we talked about communism. I mean, the Acts 2, the people in Acts 2 did like you could call it by today's standards did ascribe to the ideology of communism. They were all helping each other out. That's really what a commune, that's where that whole thing comes from, right? With people like-minded, all in like a goal. They would do anything for anyone, which is great. Like obviously, like that maybe not work on a country level, but like when it comes to like the church and everything like that, I mean that's just a cool thing. And the problem is, I think to summarize, we've gone from that to this big. To the large gatherings on Sundays, and it's like we've again kind of inadvertently created a dependence on the church to do all of our ministry for us. Well, so and it's not, like we talked about, not seeing anyone during the week that we normally see on Sunday. Not having that community, not being intentional about that, giving money to the church, expecting that they're just gonna like do all the the blessing, like bless people and do all this stuff for you, and so you don't have to worry about it. Yeah. And then we're also just saying that like, all right, well, I'm going to give my faith life to you too, because I'm just going to ascribe to whatever this pastor says, not read the Bible at all on my own.
Let me say this,
and it's just it's like we've given the church like all of that responsibility for our personal.
You're dead on, and I think the message that I would want people in the church to hear is get in the game yourself. Don't rely on others. Don't have a consumer mind. Like go do it yourself. Go serve. Go just do it is what I'm saying. Don't rely on other people to fulfill your faith, to provide you with sustenance. Like that's great and it has a purpose, but like you have to do things yourself if you want to benefit from them.
And typically people that dive in and do stuff themselves, they will find that community.
Absolutely.
If they don't have it.
So I think the other side of that argument would then be if you're a pastor in church leadership and you don't have that kind of engagement or involvement from your community, and it's like, how do we get more people serving? How do we get more involved? It's like, well, maybe it's time to really like lead the way and show them
and do some
by example.
Yeah, because
if we want people to be more generous, are we being generous to them?
Absolutely.
Or are they watching us take all of this and basically not do anything for them other than give them, an hour and 15 show?
Sure.
Yeah.
Because now, like, look at what's happening with like these like fan controlled leagues and stuff like that. This like Web 3.0, where it's like I mean, that's part of the reason why people like the stocks and stock market, because it's like, oh, I get to vote on things like company decisions because I'm a shareholder.
Yeah.
And it's like, I mean, the Acts 2 church is basically like the people decided how the money was spent. Now we're in a world where
they're too big to do that.
There's just a small group of people that run it get to decide how the money's spent. So that's, I mean, that's the beef with communism too. That's why it gets a bad rap, because it's like they take everything, but only a few people get to decide how to spend the money.
That just gets so large. You're into like corruption and all that. Yeah.
But when the people control it, like, dude, if I went to a church and they were just like, we're going to vote on how we spend our money, I'd be like, that's kind of dope.
Yeah. Like there are small churches that do that. Do.
I mean, shout out those guys. That's
giggity.
That's cool. That's cool.
But yeah, any final thoughts, guys? I know you kind of gave some of your final thoughts.
That's my final thought.
Hopefully Nike doesn't sue us for Luke saying just do it.
I didn't think of that.
Hey, bring it.